Fantastic. So I don't see any of the audience yet, but I assume you're all here. And I would like to say good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are on both sides of the Atlantic. And it's fantastic sort of seeing you and knowing that you're here with us. And we're very happy that you're joining us, of course. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished guests that we have with us today. That's Kathleen Kennedy. Kathleen, if you want to wave. And then we have Rena. Of course, your name is underneath you as well, but it's nice if you wave. And Georg Krausch from Mainz. And I also would like to say hello to our co-organizers, the German U15 team, specifically Jan Wöpking, then Eric Becker and Juliane Henska. Fantastic. My name is Kathleen Di Paula, and I'm the program manager of the German Center for Research and Innovation here in New York. We tend to call it the DWIH, which is the German abbreviation, and you have plenty of time later on to practice that if you wish. So, and the Center of Research, the Center for Research and Innovation in New York was opened in 2010. So we're 11 years old already, and it's one of 5 total centers all over the world. We have one in Sao Paulo, Brazil, we have one in Moscow, one in New Delhi, and one in Tokyo. I wish I could travel there once in a while, that would be fantastic. And we have a 6th office to be opened in San Francisco in the beginning of 2022. We're very excited about that. Our main mission here is to promote Germany as a world-class location for science and research, and also innovation, of course, and to establish opportunities for international knowledge sharing and collaboration. And of course, nobody can achieve that goal alone. We all know that. And so we work regularly with quite a number of fantastic partners, a great network of German science organizations, the chambers of commerce, and of course the embassy, as well as the consulate here in New York City. But today we're super happy and very excited to co-host this event with the German U15 University Alliance on a topic that I think is extremely important to all of us who work in institutions of higher education or in education policy, particularly here in the United States, because we had a dire 4 years when it came to research funding under the last government. And I think that's why Jan and team, we started talking that it would be a really good point in time to have a discussion on not what was, but what is hopefully going to change with the new governments that we're looking at. And we're all looking at President Biden here in the United States and his grand plans for higher education and the grand budget plans that he has, keeping our fingers crossed that everything passes and goes through as wished. And I'm also very intrigued by his wish to really take basic research and turn it into more applications at the end of the day. So that's really exciting. And you mentioned it in our little pre-talk before, there's also some changes going to happen in Germany after a long era of one chancellor that we had for 16 years, because, you know, we don't have to vote every 4, we don't have like an 8-year limit. So we will probably see some changes there as well. And the questions that we have as very close allies across the Atlantic is basically, what will that mean for research funding, research collaboration? And can we also keep the momentum of the experience from COVID that we're still experiencing now, it's not over yet, and take successes like, you know, Pfizer BioNTech and take it to the next step also in other areas. And that's basically what we want to discuss today. And I'm going to leave that, of course, to the experts and hand it over back to you, Jan. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thanks, Kathleen, for the great introduction. And that means that I can cut my introduction and keep it short, because you mentioned all the important things. So my name is Jan Wöpking. I'm the managing director of German U15, which is a coalition of 15 large leading research intensive universities in Germany, including many of which you know, Heidelberg, Munich, Humboldt University in Berlin, and of course the Johannes Gutenberg University Mainz, the president of which university we have here today as an expert. I'm very happy to be your moderator today, and I'm even more and way more happier to have the privilege of moderating such an amazing discussion with this excellent panel. And I'm going to introduce the 3 panelists to you in a moment. But I want to just briefly say what the next 60 minutes are going to be about. And the main idea, and Kathleen has already mentioned that, is that we want to discuss if we enter in a new era for research and innovation on both sides of the Atlantic, and if so, what shape it might have. Will it be a golden one? Will it be one that leads to new collaborations, or will it be one that is driven by, say, antagonism of research powers? Will it be one that is spurred by biomedical breakthroughs such as the mRNA vaccines or CRISPR-Cas9? And I'm very pleased to be able to discuss this with our three experts. And I'm going to briefly introduce them to you, to the audience, because otherwise we'll be here for 30 minutes of introductions only. So first of all, I'd like to present to you Kathleen Kennedy. She's the Executive Director of the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence, which is a multidisciplinary center which includes Collective Intelligence Design Lab and, very interestingly, the Pandemic Response Co-Lab. Kathleen, and I find that particularly interesting, used to be the president of the MIT Technology Review, which I'm sure most of us have read and are still reading at times. We also have with us the pleasure to have Rena Conti, who is the Associate Research Director of Biopharma and Public Policy for the Boston University Institute for Health System and Innovation and Policy. She's also an Associate Professor at Boston University, Quostrom School of Business, and a lot of other things too. And finally, last but not least, I'd like to introduce to you Georg Krausch, who is the President of Johannes Gutenberg Universität Mainz, the Chairman of German U15, a Professor of Physical Chemistry, and you might have heard the name of Johannes Gutenberg Universität Mainz because that was the place where this company called Biotech was founded in 2008. So it's great that you are here with us today to discuss the topic of today's session. And I'd also like to welcome the audience and would like to invite you to participate in this event as interactive as possible. So please ask your questions, comment on things, bring in your perspective. Just raise your hand, type in the chat, whatever works for you. And please don't be shy. Join in into our discussion. Just go in, okay? So let's get started. The first question I'd like to give to Rena as a kind of introductory question is, can you give us a picture of what's going on in the US research and innovation policy wise? We've been hearing lots of very interesting things over in Germany and in Europe. Eric Lander as new chief scientist, then there's this huge bill that just passed the Senate, which sounds from a German perspective, which is incredibly amazing. Can you tell us a bit of what's going on right now in the States? What has changed with the new administration?
Sure, thank you. I'm so delighted to be here. So leadership or policy comes from the top. And clearly, this is a White House that is very focused on science and technology policy. Eric Lander in the Office of Science and Technology is a very, very good sign. But I would say the fact that both the White House itself and also Congress are focused on building new investment vehicles for science and technology are also exceptionally good signs and show that they're working in parallel in some sense. Jen, you mentioned the Endless Frontiers Act that just passed in Congress, but there are other efforts that are on their way, which includes a very large infrastructure bill that hopefully Congress will make progress on this summer that does have components that will grow our wealth and also hopefully grow our health. And in addition, the White House just put out a report on building science and technology infrastructure, particularly focused on jobs, focused on technology centers, and also most importantly and interestingly focused on manufacturing capacity for both existing technology for which the pandemic showed some supply vulnerability, but also to invest in new technologies specifically related to the environment and to health, including significant investments in platform technologies and in very novel and interesting manufacturing capacity. I would say the only other thing that that is unusual about this administration and of note is that there is a very significant focus on equity. And that is a little bit different than what we've seen in the past. Typically, the fruits of innovation tend to be very concentrated. In this administration, there will be a focus on ensuring that everyone who contributes will gain fruits or will gain access to existing technology in an accessible and affordable way. And maybe we'll see, but hopefully the fruits of the next investments will also have that flavor of trying to benefit all.
Well, thank you very much. That's very interesting, and maybe we can come back to this point of equity later, because I've read very interesting things about this, and this seems to be a major change, especially when compared to the previous administration. Thank you very much for the overview of what's happening, and I think it still sounds quite impressive from a European perspective. So we've taken a look in the future, and maybe take a look. We also can take a look in the past. And Kathleen, maybe we've had behind us. We have behind us now 1.5 years of pandemic, a time when science, research, innovation was as visible, both as visible and as important as probably never before, or maybe not for a long time. What's your key lesson? What has the pandemic taught us on research and innovation? What would you take as a lesson from the pandemic regarding where we should go next?
Oh, wow. There are so many lessons, and I'm sure everyone that's part of this meeting has their own list. And this will be a very interesting point of conversation. A couple thoughts from our work. As you mentioned in the intro, we sort of rapidly mobilized around the pandemic, and at the Center for Collective Intelligence looked at what will the pandemic, how can we start to collaborate in completely new ways, and how can we accelerate the collective intelligence? There were a lot of opportunities that the pandemic brought. One was the acceleration of innovation. And we saw that basically, messenger RNA that had been something that came up in basic research in the early 90s, that has been around for a while, all of a sudden was able to be commercialized within a very short period of time. And so we saw that dramatic acceleration. Secondly, we saw a lot of silos being broken down. A lot of people, and I'd say it's the perfect example of mission-driven innovation, where you saw all kinds of different groups come together and innovating across borders, across industries, across disciplines, and coming together around this challenge that we all faced as a world together. And so, you now see that we've sort of all a little bit entrenched back into our worlds, but we hope that we'll keep, some of those connections. That's really important. It exposed a lot of challenges in our systems and how our systems are so fragile, from looking at the supply chains, and just, you sort of watched on the news and just couldn't believe that in our modern economy, we could not get masks and different things to, major metropolitan medical centers. We saw it in Boston. It was extraordinary how that things just broke down. But we also then saw, again, going back to the first point, acceleration in problem solving, and that different groups saw gaps and plugged those holes. We also saw, as Rena said, the extraordinary inequality was really exposed across various aspects of not only in the innovation chain, but in our societies. And it transformed the way we work in a number of different ways, that we are all able to be here together from all around different parts of the world and having this conversation, where normally we would have had to get on planes. And so this digital transformation of the way that we're able to communicate and collaborate is so important. We built something called the Pandemic Response Supermind Activation, which brought together 200 experts from all around the world right at the beginning of the pandemic to look at the different aspects of innovation and how we can transform our world. And those are just some of the points from that. So I'd love to talk about it more, but I think I'll pause there.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm sure we're going to come back to this, to that super interesting list you started to make, especially the point of digital transformation. I'd like to come back later in this discussion. But let's first turn to Georg. You were the president of a large university during the pandemic, and we're faced with various different challenges, I think. What has been, and at the same time, being in close proximity to what happened at Biotech, with the not only the fastest ever production and development and deployment of a vaccine against a virus, but also the complete new use of a technology which hasn't been used before. Reflecting on this, what is your, what should we take as a lesson from the pandemic, and what has made the story of BioNTech possible?
And if I may add, what could we learn? What could we improve? What, look
Yes.
to the future? Because if I start with your last question, one could be tempted to say, well, I mean, this is a super success story of research-driven innovation leading to the, as you said, to the fastest ever development of a vaccine available pretty much throughout the entire world and solving a world's problem. And I think it's worth looking back. I think it's worth to just check where this all came from. And it came from an extremely visionary scientist, a medical doctor who joined our university 30 years ago in 1990. And he followed the idea, Christoph Huber is his name, he followed the idea that we have to improve our cancer treatment. It's just not enough to kind of kill pretty much the whole body and simply hope that the cancer cells would die before the rest would die. And then you can, again, try to restore the rest. I mean, this is pretty much what chemotherapy was like 30 years ago, right? And he had this vision as an immunologist. He had this vision to train the immune system against the body's cancer cells. And on the way doing this and exploring this, what they found out was that a certain type of cancer, right? Say colon cancer, you say has different cells in your body than in mine, and a third person's cells will again look different. That is, if you want to develop a vaccine, you have to develop an individual vaccine for each and every patient, which from an economic perspective sounds pretty impossible because it would be incredibly expensive, and it actually is, or it was in the beginning. And still they went on this way, and what they needed was a way to transport information into the human body, into the immune system in a very flexible way. And this was the point why Shaheen adapted and further developed this messenger RNA technology, which actually is a technology platform, right? More than just a vaccine. And all this was meant against certain types of cancer rather than against a virus. And so that was the basis. And all this technology was developed, and first cancer treatments are in clinical studies. And this was about the time, end of 19, shortly before the pandemic, when they were listed at NASDAQ in the US, right? And then the rest, I mean, the rest is a story that has been told very often. I mean, the guys are just very good and very fast, and they just realized that it should be easy to adapt their technology to a coronavirus, and they did, and well, the rest is history, right? Now we have the vaccine and it works. That it is not totally trivial became clear looking at a different or a very similar company with a very similar history, actually, at a similar German university, actually also a U15 member, the University in Tübingen, where CureVac was founded, and they went pretty much the same way. And at the end of the day, it didn't work. At least it didn't work yet. So if we try to understand, well, first of all, what we learn is they looked for more like 30 years. They have looked for a treatment against cancer, and then at the end they developed a treatment against the coronavirus, which is a pretty different thing. That is, basic research is important, and the outcome of basic research is difficult to predict. In this respect, what happened is a part of science history, which will enter the books eventually, and there are other examples that can be quoted, which look pretty much the same. The second question is, what were important steps? Well, it was important to fund continuous, in a long-term way, to fund basic research, knowing that within a time span of 10 to 15 years, by no means this would result in a therapy. And still it was funded, and it was publicly funded by federal funds in Germany, by state funds here, by university funds. Then you need visionary people, and you need bold people. Say, we found a company. We don't have a product to sell yet, but we found a company. Well, 12 years, 13 years before the first product was sold, they founded Biotech. The university, together with the state government, founded a translation company, if you like, because the research it ended in a situation where it was too large for a university to handle, but it was not well developed yet to be sold, right? And this company called TRON, which is Translational Oncology, an acronym. This company was decisive in the process. There was in the initial phase, there was public money only. Meanwhile, they have enough income themselves to continue and even grow. Biotech, well, this was not public money in the first place. It was private money, quite a bit of private money, 200 million that went into this company. But still, it was a public support, because this beautiful large building, which we see in the news every once in a while these days, was actually built and rented to the University Medical Center. This was important for the investor, obviously, because, I mean, the company that actually moved in could go bankrupt any day, right? And the University Medical Center then gave this building to the company, right? And they are still now they are renting the company from the University Medical Center. Meanwhile, they actually wouldn't need to do this; they can simply buy it. But this is the situation. So there still was public support, even of the stage where there was a lot of private investment, right? And so, what can be learned? Number one, if you want true innovation, you need innovative, bold, visionary research. Not every research ends in an innovation of this type, right? But without visionary research, you will not have real innovations 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now. I think this is one of the messages that can be learned. And it needs support, and startups need support. And we try to learn our lesson now and try to use this momentum that we have in Mainz at the moment, obviously. But it's very clear that we need to support, and maybe we need, maybe a difference to the States, I don't know. In Germany, we do not really have the culture of founding your own company. We don't have this culture of, bankruptcy not being a big deal, right? It's just part of your CV, so to say. It's not, in Germany, this is kind of a disaster, right? It's considered like this culturally. And many of the U15 universities actually are part of a pilot project called YES, and YES is an acronym for Young Entrepreneurs in Science. And it actually addresses PhD students, and it asks the question, what would happen if you had to live on your PhD? Which I think is an interesting question. It does not only address life scientists or engineers or natural scientists, it addresses pretty much all the academic subjects that we have. And we do have, since we are a comprehensive university, we have pretty much all academic subjects. And we try to motivate the next generation of researchers to at least think about and consider to go this step, to take this step. All right, I stop here. I don't think it's, I could talk as a president about how the pandemic affected our students and our teaching personnel, but I think this is kind of aside from what we want to talk about.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I ask follow-up questions, because I have plenty of them, I'd like to take a look at the audience and see if there's any questions or comments from you, please. Then, yes, there's one. Julia, please.
Hi, thank you guys so much. So my question is particularly for the US, and I'm curious if the publicly funded and free COVID-19 vaccine opens the door for reducing the costs of publicly funded drugs in the US.
So I can start. What I think it does is open a conversation that has been happening, but not necessarily in a centralized way, about what exactly is the best use of public funds. And there is this kind of old economics literature that suggests, well, public money should go into basic science and private money should go into development and manufacturing and bringing these things to market, and the two should not meet, right? And I think over the past 15 years, there has been actually very significant investments, maybe even 20, in public dollars going further and further into the pipeline. And certainly with medical countermeasures, there's been even investment in platform technology and in manufacturing. If anything, COVID has accelerated that process, and thinking very hard about public entrepreneurial finance, other methods that we can use to fund startups, frankly, and partner with the private sector to bring public money and private money together to invest in things that both have a public good aspect to them, but also might have spillovers into helping the private sector. BARDA Ventures just started just a couple of weeks ago. That's an incredible new effort that really is taking a lesson from DARPA, from the Defense Department, in bringing public and private together to create a fund that then will fund public science that will actually be embodied in products. And those things will spill over both to the public sector and also the private sector. So I think actually we're in a new day. We know a lot more about how to do financing, and that it's not just about basic science. It's about other types of investments that only the government can solve missing markets and accelerate them.
Did this answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I'm also thinking a little bit though in terms of equity when it comes down for a patient, right? So if I'm a taxpayer who's paying my taxes, and then that's being used in various wonderful, responsible ways to develop the drugs, but then particularly when it comes to the US, I'm paying again, I'm basically paying twice, once for the drug being created, and then again to purchase that drug. So I'm just wondering a little bit there in terms of like when we think of investment in research and then equity when it comes to a patient in need.
Yeah, so that's the other side of the coin, which is we cannot invest public dollars without ensuring that everybody has access to these things. And as you all know, many people in the US are very underinsured, if uninsured, for access to this technology. There are very significant problems with people getting access, for example, to CAR T therapy that are really harming individual patients and their families. Many of the people who would potentially benefit the most are children who are really underinsured in the US. And so this question of equity, who pays and who benefits, is actually critical. And I agree with Catherine. We've been having this conversation for the better part of 15 or 20 years, but now COVID has accelerated that, and we are in an untenable situation. Now we really have to have both science and access to healthcare moving in parallel tracks with the same level of dedication and money.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to stick maybe with this topic of equity that you brought up in your first comment, Rena, because I think this is a discussion that we both see in the US and in Germany. And I'm thinking about the concentration of research funding in clusters, in highly effective, highly productive clusters. When I think of the US, that's of course Boston, it's New York, it's the Silicon Valley. And in Germany, the situation is less concentrated, I think, but we're starting to have a similar discussion in Germany about where research money and research funding is concentrated and if it's the distribution is fair enough. And when I was looking at the bill, the Innovation and Competition Act, that is in the parliamentary process in the US, there was this one sentence with regard to the establishment of university technology hubs. There's supposed to be 10 of these hubs, and there's this sentence in the bill that I found really interesting, and it's, I quote, the establishment of these technology hubs has to be in a way that is, I quote, maximizing regional and geographic diversity, end of quote. So you can't just put them, you can't have 3 hubs in Boston and 3 in New York and then 4 in the Valley. You have to spread them out evenly across the country. And I think that's a very interesting point. And so in Europe, we have this discussion under the label of widening. And in the UK, we have a discussion about leveling up of parts of the country that so far haven't been benefiting from research funding. So the question I want to ask you, what's the kind of discussion you're having in the US, and what's your perspective in Germany, Georg, on this? And especially, how do you balance this idea, which sounds, of course, like the thing to do, of maximizing geographical diversity and finding a balance there? How do you balance that with the idea of giving money to the places that are excellent, that are the best places for it? And we know, when we look at Boston, we know that Boston is such a global place for health innovation because there's so much going on in Boston. And that's precisely because it's concentrated in Boston and not spread across the US. So, but I think this is a question that's really gonna be crucial in the next years. How do we find a balance between all parts of the country participating in research, and at the same time guaranteeing that we have these centers of excellence?
Who's about to start?
Yeah.
I'm sure Kathleen has something to say about this.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, let's see, from looking at it from a technology standpoint, one of the pluses is the idea that the pandemic showed that we can really transform the way that we work, and that we don't all need to be centered in Boston, and that people can be distributed all over. So I think that there was a massive redistribution of talent that happened, and the digital technologies that enable us to work together in new ways. I think we're really just at the beginning of seeing. We saw that in a highly concentrated way, but I think that that's part of the great leveling that can happen. Another is we really need to transform the way that we're educating people, and looking at how we are distributing the talent across all regions. That is another aspect of the bill that you're talking about, is about sort of education. That I've been very involved in that, in looking at how do we train at scale. That's a really important point. That's also in that bill, of putting a lot of money towards that, because that's the only way that we can do it. We really need to transform the systems and the populations. I think those are key points. I don't know if Rena wants to talk a little bit more on a policy perspective from the US, and then I'd love to hear the German perspective on this.
Yeah, thank you. So as Kathleen mentioned, I think there's in doing science, there's an important investments that can be made in capital. So distributing awards to different types of places. Historically, Black colleges have gotten funds actually in both administrations. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see a doubling down in investment in them, and also in the former land grant colleges, which include places in the Midwest and places in the South. But also there's labor. There's diversity in labor, and as Kathleen said, I think that's a huge focus of efforts here, and will, again, may pay off now, but will really pay off in a decade. There's also diversity in sourcing. So doing science requires lots of contracts from lots of different manufacturers to keep the lights on and keep the university running. And there's no reason why those supply chains can't be more diversified, and should be more diversified. And then finally, we're hearing a lot about more investment by the biotech companies themselves in local communities, where they are making decisions about wanting to invest in specific types of educational initiatives, specific types of hunger and poverty initiatives. We're seeing this in Boston, we're seeing this in San Diego. I think this is actually super promising, and might be uniquely US based, but is good nonetheless.
Well, you asked for the German perspective, right? I'm not sure that it's easy to compare. We have, at least when it comes to the university system, we have a very different university system in Germany as compared, for instance, to the US, and I would also say to the UK as well. In that we're looking at some, I don't know the exact number, 110 universities distributed over 16 states. And I would say pretty much of the same quality. And if it comes to fairness, I have problems with this word fair when it comes to distribution of research money. Research money shouldn't be distributed fairly. It should be distributed in a transparent way to the best, because this is where it will have the best revenue for the taxpayer at the end of the day. And we have this discussion in what we call this excellence strategy, which is an excellency program of the federal and state governments, and there are politicians asking for a broader distribution of this money. So this I don't think is a good idea. If it comes to fairness in Germany, I would say that the starting point for such initiatives where money is distributed on basis of excellent research, the starting positions, they should be pretty much the same. And this is a matter of fairness, right? So all the 16 states, all universities should have like the same kind of budget per student or something. And we simply don't. Although we're public, although we do not live on tuition, we just live on public funding for our basic funds. And they are depending on the tax income of the different states among the 16s, they are very different, right? And so fairness, I would only ask for at this point, but I would not ask for fairness in the sense of distributing money for excellent research. I mean, this should follow excellent research, right? And at the end of the day, you have the same that you have in the US. If you put a lot of money to some place, very good people will be attracted to come to this place, and they will become even better, and they will be better and better and better over time. And in the next round of any kind of excellence initiative, they will again win and get money. But if I compare the budget of our excellence initiative to the total budget of our basic funding, this is actually a small portion, and therefore it doesn't really make too much of a difference if you look on an average scale. I think this is very different in the US, where you have Ivy League schools, where you have top publicly funded schools, and then you have community colleges, and everything is called a university, and it's very, very difficult to compare between the different institutions because they're very different in their research power, for instance. These differences simply do not exist in Germany.
Okay. There was one thing one thing I want to follow up on is something you said, Kathleen, that the pandemic, and I think this is this concerns all three contributions to this question, that the pandemic has accelerated digital transformation, and that the same reasons why we're having this kind of meeting right now can also lead to quite substantial changes in the way we do research collaboration, innovation collaboration in the future. And I hear that a lot, and somehow I'm still skeptical about it, because I think that in the end, what we're doing works. But if you want to have top researchers working together, they need to do this on a basis of proximity, of density within the city. Or do you really think this is changing? And can we really have, and this relates to a question that we've seen in the chat concerning cross-border collaboration, because if digital transformation really changes the way we do research and innovation, then this could lead to a whole different kind of international landscape, and would make it much easier to have, say, Boston collaborating with Berlin as two of the health innovation capitals. Berlin not quite there where Boston is, I admit, but they might be at some point. But do you really think, what's the potential of digital transformation concerning actual research practice? Do you think it's going to make a big difference in the future?
I do. And I think I think that groups that have a lot of power right now might be a little bit more resistant to change. But you are seeing the rise of, I'm very involved in one initiative called the Community Biotech Initiative. That is based at MIT, but it's actually a global community of community biotech labs all around the world that are independent community labs that do research. And they are innovating in so many different ways on how collaboration is done. And they are moving, they can move like sailboats. They can move really fast. And they mobilized with the pandemic so rapidly, and using digital tools and things like Facebook. There's a guy on there that uses Facebook as his lab notebook and posts what he does every day with his experiments. And so you're seeing a younger generation not see sort of the the way things should be, or the barriers or the traditions that we all see, but they just look at what is possible and we can do it. And so I think that we're going to have there's a major transformation happening because it's enabled by digital technologies. The door was opened because of the pandemic, and you have digital natives that just really do think in a different way, and that are starting to go up the ranks and get more and more power. So I think you're really going to see a shift there. But obviously our systems need to be transformed, our incentives need to change, our policies need to change. And this background that is behind me right here is actually for a new methodology that we're launching at MIT called Supermind Design. And what that is the idea of how do we actually architect these new types of systems and organizations of groups, thinking about the world that we're going to be living in versus thinking about organizational design from the 20th century. How do we really think about how organizations need to be designed for the future that we want? And so that's something that we are just launching. We just sort of built this identity, and we'll be launching the website at superminds.com within, hopefully by the end of July. And so that I think is critical, that we need to reimagine what our systems are, and we need to have architecture that helps us to do that. And that's something that we're working on.
So
I find this very interesting. Oops.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was just wondering, I mean, one aspect why this biotech thing worked that quickly is because they were reasonably small as compared to a large pharma, right? And they had a flexible administration, and they had a flexible board saying, yeah, go ahead, do this Lightspeed project, starting in January last year, and now with all the success, they are growing and growing, and they have to, right? Otherwise, they won't survive, right? And as soon as they have grown to a certain size, as a physicist, you know that there is things that are larger and heavier are more difficult to accelerate. Let's put it this way. Right? That would be the precise physics way to say. And this is exactly what they experience these days. And this is interesting, right? As long as you're small and you're flexible and agile and so on and so forth, that is fine. As soon as you want to deliver billions of little bottles of vaccine, you simply can't afford to be small, right? And what does this do to the company, and what does this do to the heads, to the scientific heads in the company, and how will they deal with it? This is going to be an interesting thing to see.
Yeah, and just to compliment Georg, I completely agree with you. And I think some of the knowledge transfer and transformation that's happening now really does challenge traditional incentives for innovation. Specifically, we like to think that much of this can be embodied in technology that can be patented, and then that delivers on shareholder value to these companies because they can exercise temporary monopoly rights. But in an open science type environment, and I actually think that we're even seeing this already with the COVID vaccine conversation across Europe and the US, much of the knowledge is in trade secrets. Much of the knowledge is in the process of manufacturing itself. And therefore, the kind of these old incentives related to IP might actually have to be rethought, and who actually benefits and when you benefit, what the prices are, who pays, etc., might actually also need to be thought through. One other thing that that I'm seeing a glimmer of, which I'm really excited about, is that there are clearly opportunities for new uses of old things here. And the recovery trial in the UK is truly landmark. It was a essentially a group of scientists that got together very quickly and said, well, how do we prove that things that exist are safe and effective for COVID? Quickly, how do we fail fast and move on, basically, both from a private perspective, but also collectively. And those type of basket trials, those type of trials that are Bayesian in nature, that are using the kind of most precious resource, patients, in the most efficient and effective way to learn whether these things actually work, I think now might be a really interesting time to start thinking about that more as well. That would also require our regulators to innovate too, which might be a little bit difficult, but we'll see. I'm hopeful.
Okay, so thank you very much. One more question related to this is we see with the new U.S. administration and its new focus on international collaboration, we see a window of opportunity there that's especially visible compared to what it was in the last 4 years. So the US seems to be very interested, and when you read through the bill, you find lots of passages, oh, we have to strengthen the transatlantic dialogue and things like that. And given also what Kathleen you stressed about the digital transformation and the potential of this, what's your idea? What's your potential? What do you think of the international collaboration transatlantic-wise? Is there new potential for US-German collaboration in these things, research, innovation? Can this change to the better? Is it, or will it stay the same as it is, which is pretty good?
Well, I certainly hope it changes for the better. I would say that I've been doing, we've been doing collaboration for a number of years, but actually it started, it increased remarkably with the pandemic with Merck in Darmstadt, Germany, has been a longtime collaborator with our center, and we built out a big collaboration. I've seen, a transformation within that organization over the years that we've been working together. Over time, the collaboration, there's just sort of a shift. It's even hard to explain, just in sort of the way that they were so logical and rule-based, and we weren't allowed to do anything creative, to now that we've really sort of pushed through and been doing this pandemic response work. And now we just launched what we call the Future of Life Sciences Supermind, where we just did that, started that last month, where we brought together 200 people from all across the world to really look at what is the future of scientific research and development across the life sciences. What are the new technologies that are disrupting that? How do we need to adapt to it? How do we need to communicate in new ways? How do we break down the silos? So that's sort of a new big study that we launched last month in conjunction with Merck. And so I'd say that I think that there's a real openness that I'm seeing in the organization that is really positive.
Okay, so lots of optimism there. Rena and Georg?
I would say knowledge transfer is clearly important and accelerating that. Also, a focus on investments that improve health, but also improve our security in the bio space, I think are clearly going to be priorities for the administration, and ones that I expect that we'll see more of. And then I think there's a lot of really incredibly important and interesting ways of thinking about public entrepreneurial finance, both for the growing of new science, but also for paying for things once they become available. There's loans, there's grants, there's venture funds, there's many other types of vehicles out there that can be created and or at least facilitated by public and private investment, and I expect that we'll see more of that.
Well, what could I add? Let me be very conservative and say what we need is a clear commitment to basic research. If this is not there, then there will nothing will be invented 20 years from now. And as you said, be quick and fail quickly, you said before. Yes, indeed. Realize that basic research, fundamental research fails. The wrong ideas, wrong directions to be taken. And you can be sure if you talk to the guys behind Biotech, they can tell you many stories of wrong ways of failure. And you might get up and adjust the crown and go on, right? I mean, it's this seems to be important. And what I would say, at least in the German discussion, it's very important to make clear that this happens in universities, in particular when it comes to biotechnology and patients. It happens solely in the universities, because this is the only place where patients are, in the university medical hospitals, right? And we have to invest. And if we talk about our federal state election, if we talk about changes in Germany, I mean, what we all are afraid of is that despite the fact that it was universities and research and science that saved the world from this pandemic, the fact that the pandemic cost so much money for the rest of the population, that we will face budget cuts after the federal election, and that it will be exactly the universities that will face budget cuts at the end of the day, which would be a ridiculous outcome of this entire process. But this is something that's a story that we have to tell. And it's not only that research is done at universities, but it's also that knowledge is kept over generations at the universities, right? I mean, I'm going to bore Jan when I tell this example, but I mean, my favorite example is general relativity. General relativity was developed and found by Einstein around 1910, approximately. I don't know exactly, right? Certainly not to develop a global positioning system and a new navigation, right? It was simply done to understand gravity. Right? And it is horrible mathematics. I've studied physics myself. I know what I'm talking about. Generations of physics students have been tortured by this theory, right? And it was of no use whatsoever, right? Until we were able to build atomic clocks, until we were able to build satellites, and so on and so on. 70s, 80s, last century, right? We could think of a global positioning system. If our little smartphones and watches and cars would not know their general relativity, we would never end up where we want to end up based on such positioning systems, right? Simply because the atomic clocks on the satellites go somewhat faster than the atomic clocks, the same atomic clocks down here, simply because gravity is a little bit smaller up in the skies than it is here. And this, if we had not kept this information, this theory as a value in itself, over generations of scientists, we would have not been able to make this lot of money that is made these days, for instance, by GPS and systems alike, right? So universities have this important role in being a storage of knowledge and teaching knowledge to the next generation, right? And storing it this way, and make it available whenever it's needed.
So thank you very much, because these were the perfect closing remarks, I think, for our session. Mixing, if I may say that, American optimism with a decent part of German skepticism, but equally, but actually beneath the surface, equally optimistic about what's possible in the future. And I think the last 1.5 years have shown us, and you mentioned that several times during this discussion, what could be possible and what actually was possible and has been possible. And if we continue some of these things further in the future, then this could really be a new era for research and innovation. Thank you very much to all of our panelists for this discussion. It's now 6 p.m. in Germany. It's what's it in the US? It's noon, I guess, in the US. Thank you all. And maybe Kathleen, you want to do the official goodbye part?
Absolutely, it would be my pleasure. First of all, of course, thank you to all of you. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to our partners in crime. This was a very, very engaging discussion. And like you, Jan, I'm taking many, many positive thoughts with me. And what encouraged me a lot, because I'm not a physicist, I'm a cultural studies major actually, was that Mr. Krausch, I'm super optimistic that we can use all this knowledge and enhance it by adding other disciplines to it as well. And we get even more business models at the end of the day. So I think this is a way to go forward. And I think, Kathleen, you're doing that quite a bit with your institute. And Rena, when you were talking, it was going in the same direction. So thank you very much for this very, very engaging discussion also from us here in New York. And I would like to thank the audience and also encourage you to stay tuned with us. Sign up for our newsletter, Google the German Center for Research and Innovation, sign up for the newsletter. Do not get discouraged. You have to double opt in. That's the German data protection law. It might end up in your spam, still double opt in. And then we would love to have a continuation of this discussion. And I think we should really work on this. So thank you very much again. It was lovely seeing you. Have a fantastic afternoon, evening, and day. And we see you here soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Goodbye, everyone.